Desire hit her hard. When her best friend's husband revealed the panties he hid for 30 years, she never thought the past could bleed into the present like that. Not in a living room full of people on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, not surrounded by friends and laughter and the comfortable noise of a casual gathering, but when her best friend's husband Marcus walked toward her across that crowded room and quietly, deliberately placed a small, worn packet wrapped in yellowed tissue paper on the coffee table in front of her, the world around her tilted violently on its axis. Everything, the conversations, the music playing softly in the background, the clink of glasses and plates, all of it faded into white noise as she stared at that packet like it was a bomb about to detonate. Inside it was a pair of panties, delicate, old, impossibly preserved, untouched by the 3 decades they'd been hidden. Panties, he admitted in a voice barely above a whisper, that he had been hiding for 30 years. Not because they belonged to someone forbidden, not because they tied him to a past affair or scandalous relationship, but because they were connected to her, to a version of her life she was never meant to remember, to a past that had been deliberately erased from her consciousness, to a truth that should have stayed buried forever. His voice trembled as he began to confess the truth he'd been carrying alone for 3 decades. He had been guarding that secret since the day he first saw her, decades ago, long before she ever met him, long before she knew his wife existed, long before any of their current lives had taken shape. And as she stared at the panties, impossibly preserved, impossibly familiar in ways that made her skin prickle with recognition she couldn't explain, something electric and terrifying ran through her entire body. Desire mixed with fear, mixed with recognition, mixed with something even more dangerous. The sense that the past she never lived, the life she never remembered, had just found her again after 30 years. The room felt too bright, the air felt too thin, and for the first time in 30 years, Marcus let the truth escape his carefully guarded silence. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her, and everything she thought she knew about her life was about to be revealed as carefully constructed fiction. Before I take you into the most psychologically disturbing and ultimately shocking revelation of my entire existence, you need to stop everything right now and subscribe to this channel immediately. Turn on notifications, because this story is going to take you places so unexpected, so twisted, so absolutely insane that you will not believe where it ends up. I promise you that nothing you're imagining right now is correct. The truth is stranger and more disturbing than anything you could predict. So subscribe right now, because I share stories that push boundaries and explore the darkest corners of human experience every single week. Smash that like button, because this story needs to reach people who understand that reality is often more bizarre than fiction. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever discovered something about your past that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself. Because what I discovered that afternoon destroyed and rebuilt my entire identity. This channel exists for real stories about real psychological mysteries that defy explanation. So engage, like, comment, subscribe, share, because this is the kind of story that will haunt you for days after you hear it. My name is Catherine. I'm 48 years old, and 6 months ago, at a casual Sunday gathering at my best friend Laura's house, her husband Marcus revealed a secret that shattered my understanding of my own history. To comprehend what happened that afternoon, you need to understand several things. First, Laura and I had been best friends for 15 years, an intimate friendship built on complete trust and transparency. Second, I'd always had strange gaps in my childhood memories, entire years from ages 7 to 11 that existed as blank spaces I couldn't access no matter how hard I tried. Third, I'd been having recurring dreams for my entire adult life about a white room, a man's voice speaking softly to me, and the overwhelming sense that I'd lost something precious I could never get back. And fourth, I'd always felt an inexplicable discomfort around Marcus, even though he'd never done anything inappropriate, just this persistent sense that he knew something about me I didn't know about myself. If you're already hooked and need to know what Marcus revealed, hit that like button right now and comment 30 years, because this secret goes deeper than you can imagine. The Sunday gathering had been Laura's idea, just 10 close friends spending the afternoon together, casual and comfortable. I'd arrived around 2 p.m., brought wine and flowers, settled into the familiar rhythm of friendship, Marcus had seemed tense all afternoon, drinking more than usual, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Around 4 p.m., during a lull when most people were outside on the patio, Marcus approached me where I sat alone in the living room. He was carrying something small wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age. "Catherine," he said, his voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you the moment Laura introduced us 15 years ago. Something I've been carrying alone for 30 years. He placed the packet on the coffee table in front of me. "I need you to open this, and then I need you to let me explain what it means. But I'm warning you. Once I tell you this truth, you can't unknow it. Your understanding of your entire life is going to change." My hands trembled as I picked up the packet. The tissue paper was brittle with age, carefully preserved. Inside was a pair of small cotton panties, child-sized, with a pattern of yellow flowers. They were clean, but clearly old, the fabric faded but intact. And the moment I saw them, something in my brain sparked with recognition I couldn't explain. I'd never seen these panties before. I was certain of that. But they felt familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely working. "Why do you have child's underwear wrapped up like some kind of keepsake? Marcus, what is this?" Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from me. "Those belong to you. 30 years ago when you were 11 years old. I was 19. And I was part of something I've spent 3 decades trying to make right." Subscribe to this channel immediately, because what Marcus reveals next is absolutely disturbing and will change how you think about memory and trauma. "I don't understand," I said, but already my heart was racing because part of me was starting to understand in ways my conscious mind refused to accept. "I don't remember you from when I was 11. I don't remember anything from that age. There are years of my childhood that are just blank." "I know," Marcus said. "That's because of what happened to you. Catherine, when you were 11 years old, you were abducted, taken from a park near your house and held for 6 days in a facility that was conducting illegal psychological experiments on children. I know this because I was there, not as a victim, as someone who worked there. I was 19, stupid, desperate for money, and I took a job I didn't understand with people I should have never trusted." The room started spinning. Abducted, experiments. None of this was possible. I'd grown up normally with my parents in suburban Maryland. I had memories of childhood, school, friends, family vacations. I wasn't some missing child. I wasn't. "Your parents were told you'd been found wandering, confused, after being missing for 6 days," Marcus continued. "They were told you'd been traumatized, and that the best thing for your recovery was experimental memory suppression therapy. They agreed because they were desperate to help you heal. They didn't know the therapy was actually designed to cover up what had been done to you in that facility." "What was done to me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "What kind of experiments?" Marcus's face was gray with guilt and shame. "Psychological conditioning, testing how completely you could disassociate childhood memories through trauma and hypnosis, seeing if subjects could have entire sections of their past erased and replaced with manufactured memories. You weren't the only child. There were 12 of you over the course of 2 years, all between ages 9 and 12, all held briefly, experimented on, then returned with memories altered. Leave a comment saying, 'illegal experiments,' if this is absolutely horrifying you, because it gets even darker." "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why would anyone do that to children?" "Military applications," Marcus said flatly. "Creating soldiers or operatives who could have traumatic experiences erased, who could be programmed and reprogrammed without retaining conflicting memories." The project was shut down after 2 years when one of the children died from complications of the memory suppression drugs. Everyone involved scattered, evidence was destroyed, and the 12 surviving children went on living their lives with manufactured pasts and no memory of what had been done to them. "The panties," I said, looking down at the yellowed package still in my hands. "Why do you have my underwear from 30 years ago?" Marcus's voice broke. "Because on your last day in that facility you were so scared and dissociated that you had an accident. You were 11 years old, and you'd been through 6 days of psychological torture and you were terrified. I was supposed to dispose of your clothes, prepare you for the memory suppression procedure, but instead, I kept them. Kept them as evidence, as proof of what had been done, as penance for my participation. I kept them because I told myself someday I'd make this right. Someday I'd find you and tell you the truth. You found me 15 years ago, I said slowly, pieces clicking together. When you met Laura, when you started dating her, you knew who I was. I knew who you were the moment I saw you at that coffee shop where Laura introduced us, Marcus admitted. I'd tracked several of the children from the program over the years, checking that they were surviving, that the memory suppression was holding. When I met Laura and she mentioned her best friend Catherine, who was exactly the right age and had mysterious gaps in childhood memory, I had to know. Pulled up old photos from the facility archives I'd stolen when the project shut down. It was you. My wife's best friend was the 11-year-old girl I'd helped torture 30 years earlier. Hit that subscribe button right now because this confession is about to take an even more twisted turn. Why didn't you tell me immediately? I demanded, anger starting to break through shock. Why wait 15 years? Why let me become friends with your wife? Why integrate yourself into my life? Why watch me all this time without saying anything? Because I was a coward, Marcus said. Because telling you meant confessing what I'd done. Meant destroying my marriage when Laura learned I'd kept the secret from her. Meant potentially triggering memories that might destroy you psychologically. The memory suppression was designed to be permanent. Forcing those memories back could cause complete mental breakdown. And you're risking that now because... I prompted. Marcus pulled out a newspaper clipping and handed it to me. The headline read, Experimental Memory Suppression Program. Victims come forward. Class action lawsuit filed. Because 3 of the other victims have recovered their memories, Marcus said, have come forward and are suing everyone involved. The story is going to break nationally in the next week. Your name is going to come out as one of the 12 children, and I couldn't let you learn about this from news coverage. Couldn't let you discover what happened without context, without someone who was there to fill in the gaps. I looked at the panties in my hands. Physical evidence of trauma I couldn't remember. Proof that years of my childhood had been stolen and replaced with manufactured normalcy. What do I do with this information? I asked. How do I live knowing my past isn't real? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I know you don't have to do it alone. I've spent 30 years researching memory recovery, trauma therapy, ways to help victims of this program. I've prepared for this conversation for 15 years. And Catherine, I know you probably hate me. I know I'm the last person you should trust, but I need you to know, what I did when I was 19 was unforgivable, but I've spent half my life trying to make it right. Share this video right now because people need to know that illegal human experimentation didn't end decades ago. It's ongoing and hidden. Does Laura know? I asked. Does your wife know what you did? What you've been hiding? She knows I worked at a research facility that got shut down for ethical violations. She knows I've struggled with guilt about things I witnessed, but she doesn't know the details, doesn't know you were one of the children, doesn't know I've been keeping evidence hidden in our house for 15 years. I'll tell her everything tonight. I'll accept whatever consequences come from that. But I needed to tell you first. The next hours were surreal. Marcus called in several of the other friends still at the party, told them he needed to confess something and needed witnesses. With me sitting there holding decades-old evidence of my own forgotten trauma, Marcus told Laura and our assembled friends everything. About the illegal program, about his involvement, about knowing who I was for 15 years and saying nothing, about the evidence he'd been hiding, and the truth that was about to become public. Laura's reaction was expected. Shock, betrayal, anger at being lied to for their entire relationship, but also horror at what had been done to me. To the other children. Our friends sat frozen, trying to process that their ordinary Sunday afternoon had revealed something from a psychological thriller. And I sat there feeling dissociated, like I was watching this happen to someone else, like the Catherine I'd been that morning no longer existed, and I was being rebuilt into someone new who carried trauma I couldn't access. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the aftermath of this revelation gets even more complicated. That night, alone in my apartment, I held those panties and I cried. Cried for the 11-year-old girl who'd been taken and experimented on and had her memories stolen. Cried for the woman I'd become who'd spent 37 years living a partially manufactured past. Cried for the friendship with Laura that might not survive her husband's confession. Cried for the simplicity of my life that had just been destroyed by truth. Over the following weeks, Marcus gave me everything. Copies of documents he'd stolen from the facility showing I'd been Subject 7, photos of the 12 children, including me at 11, looking terrified and dissociated, names of the doctors and administrators who'd run the program, contact information for the other survivors who'd come forward, access to his research on memory recovery and trauma therapy. I joined the lawsuit, met the 3 other survivors who'd recovered memories, 2 women and a man, all now in their late 30s to mid-40s, all carrying trauma from the same program. Heard their stories about the White Room, the voice asking questions over and over, the injections that made everything hazy, the sense that their minds were being disassembled and rebuilt, stories that matched my recurring dreams with horrifying precision. I started therapy with a specialist in recovered memory trauma, started the careful, agonizing process of trying to access those 4 missing years. Some memories came back in fragments. The park where I'd been taken, the van with no windows, the White Room I'd been dreaming about my entire life. But much remained blank, protected by whatever drugs and hypnosis had been used to bury the experience. The news story broke. Illegal child experimentation program exposed. 30 years later, victims seek justice. My name was in the article as one of the 12 children subjected to psychological torture in the name of military research. My phone exploded with calls from journalists, concerned friends, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My parents were confronted with the revelation that their decision to allow experimental therapy had actually been participation in a cover-up. They hadn't known. They'd trusted doctors who said they were helping their traumatized daughter heal, but learning they'd unknowingly allowed my memories to be suppressed destroyed them with guilt. Leave a comment saying "justice" if you think everyone involved in this program should face criminal charges. Laura and Marcus separated. Not because Laura couldn't forgive his teenage participation in something he didn't fully understand, but because he'd lied for 15 years, had kept evidence hidden in their house, had built their entire relationship on concealment. She felt she'd never really known him, never understood who she'd married. The betrayal wasn't what he'd done at 19. It was what he'd chosen not to tell her for their entire marriage. My friendship with Laura became complicated. She wasn't angry at me. None of this was my fault. But seeing me reminded her of Marcus's deception, reminded her that her husband had known this massive secret about her best friend and said nothing for 15 years. We needed space from each other, needed time to process separately, needed to figure out who we were now that this truth had detonated in the center of our lives. Marcus became an unexpected ally in my recovery. He provided detailed accounts of what had happened during my 6 days in the facility, filling in gaps my memory couldn't access. He testified in depositions for the lawsuit, his insider account providing crucial evidence. He connected me with other former staff who'd been haunted by their participation and were finally willing to come forward. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He knew what he'd done was unforgivable, but he was doing everything possible to make amends. The lawsuit took 8 months. In the end, the surviving administrators and the company that had funded the program settled for an amount that wouldn't undo the damage, but would fund trauma therapy for all 12 victims and establish a foundation to expose and prevent similar programs. 3 of the administrators faced criminal charges for child endangerment and illegal human experimentation. The project's lead doctor had died years earlier, escaping accountability. But beyond legal justice, I had to figure out how to live with this truth. How to integrate the knowledge that 4 years of my childhood weren't real with the person I'd become based on those manufactured memories. How to reconcile the woman I'd been that morning before Marcus's confession with the woman I was now who carried recovered trauma. How to move forward when the past kept reshaping itself. Hit that like button if you're completely stunned by this story, because the ending is even more unexpected than everything that came before. The most disturbing part wasn't the abduction or the experiments, traumatic as those were. The most disturbing part was the panties, those yellowed, preserved child's underwear that Marcus had kept for 30 years. As my memories started returning, I remembered that final day in the facility, remembered being 11 years old and so scared I'd lost control of my bladder, remembered a young man, Marcus at 19, speaking to me gently as he helped me clean up, telling me it was okay, that I'd be home soon. remembered him giving me new clothes, and I remembered something else that made this entire situation even more psychologically complex. I remembered feeling, even through my terror, that Marcus was different from the others, that he was uncomfortable with what was happening, that he didn't want to be there. I remembered him whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," as he prepared me for the memory suppression procedure. 11-year-old me had recognized that this teenage boy was trapped in something he didn't know how to escape, and 37 years later, learning he'd kept evidence of that day as penance, rather than as some sick trophy, recontextualized everything. The panties weren't evidence of perversion. They were evidence of guilt, of a 19-year-old boy who'd participated in something evil and had spent 3 decades trying to make it right in the only ways he knew how. When I finally confronted Marcus about why specifically keep that particular item, his answer devastated me. "Because that was the moment I realized what we were really doing," Marcus said. Seeing an 11-year-old girl so traumatized she couldn't control her body made it real in ways the clinical language and scientific justifications had obscured. You weren't a subject or a test case. You were a terrified child being tortured for research. And I kept that evidence because I never wanted to forget what we'd done. Never wanted to let myself off the hook. Those panties have haunted me for 30 years, which is exactly what I deserved. Share this video if you believe that accountability requires truth, even when truth is devastating. It's been 6 months since that Sunday afternoon when Marcus placed yellowed tissue paper on the coffee table and detonated my entire understanding of my history. 6 months of therapy and recovered memories and legal proceedings, and trying to build a life on a foundation of truth rather than manufactured normalcy. Laura and Marcus are divorced now. She couldn't recover from the betrayal of 15 years of lies, but she's remained my friend, both of us navigating the complicated reality that her ex-husband saved me in some ways even while initially participating in my destruction. Marcus testified in all the criminal proceedings, his insider account leading to convictions that might not have been possible otherwise. He's lost his marriage, his reputation, many of his friendships. He lives with the consequences of his 19-year-old self's choices and his adult self's decision to hide truth for 15 years. I don't forgive him. I'm not sure forgiveness is possible for participating in child torture regardless of age or circumstances, but I understand him. Understand that sometimes people do unforgivable things and then spend their lives trying to make amends without ever succeeding. Understand that guilt can drive people to both cowardice and courage. The other 11 survivors and I have formed our own support network. We meet monthly, share our recovered memories, support each other through the ongoing process of integrating traumatic past with manufactured present. 3 of us have recovered extensive memories. 5 have fragments. 4 have chosen not to pursue memory recovery, deciding that living with uncertainty is preferable to potential psychological breakdown from recovered trauma. All of us carry the knowledge that our childhoods were stolen, and our minds were violated in ways that should never happen to any human being. Subscribe to this channel if you believe survivors of illegal experimentation deserve to have their stories heard, because there are more of us than anyone wants to acknowledge. People ask if I wish Marcus had never told me, if I'd prefer to have continued living with my manufactured memories rather than knowing the truth. And honestly, I don't know. Some days I wish I could go back to the ignorance of that Sunday morning before the revelation, back to believing my childhood was normal and my past was real, back to simple friendship with Laura and uncomplicated discomfort around Marcus, rather than the complex reality of understanding why that discomfort existed. But other days, I'm grateful for the truth. Grateful to understand why I've had recurring nightmares about white rooms my entire life. Grateful to know why 4 years of my childhood are blank. Grateful to be connected with other survivors instead of carrying this experience alone. Grateful that the administrators who did this are facing consequences even 30 years later. The panties sit in an evidence box now, part of the legal record that helped convict the program's administrators. I don't want them back. Don't want that physical reminder of trauma sitting in my home. But I'm glad they existed. Glad Marcus kept them. Glad that his guilt led him to preserve evidence that might have otherwise been destroyed. Because those yellowed child's underwear became the key that unlocked an entire hidden program, exposed illegal experimentation, brought justice for 12 children who'd been tortured and then had their memories stolen to cover up the crime. If this story has affected you deeply, if it's made you think about memory and trauma and the reality of human experimentation, do something important right now. Hit that like button so this story reaches more people. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because I share true stories that expose hidden realities every week. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Do you think Marcus redeemed himself through his eventual confession and testimony? Would you want to know this kind of truth about your past? Share this video widely because people need to know that illegal human experimentation hasn't ended. It's just become more hidden. That Sunday afternoon when desire hit me hard wasn't desire in any romantic or sexual sense. It was desire for truth, desire for understanding, desire to know why my past felt manufactured. And when Marcus revealed the panties he'd hidden for 30 years, when he finally confessed what had been done to me and his role in it, that desire was both satisfied and devastated, because truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes truth just reveals that you were never as free as you believed you were, that your mind was violated and your memories were stolen, and your childhood was a psychological experiment disguised as normalcy. I'm Catherine. I'm 48 years old, and 37 years ago I was abducted, experimented on, and had my memories suppressed to cover up crimes against children. For 30 years, I lived with manufactured past and recurring nightmares I couldn't explain. And 6 months ago, a pair of yellowed child's panties became the key that unlocked the truth I'd been programmed to forget. This is my story. This is my truth. And I'm sharing it because somewhere out there are other survivors of programs like this who think they're crazy, who have gaps in their memories they can't explain, who have nightmares about experiences they can't remember. You're not crazy. Your mind was violated, and you deserve to know the truth, even though truth is devastating. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. And remember, some secrets should have stayed buried, but others need to be exposed no matter how disturbing they are. This was one that needed exposure. The end.